Hi algebra students, this is our introduction video for our lesson on domain and range, part 2. This is also our last lesson in this unit, so after today's lesson you will be function experts. This lesson is finishing up our conversation on domain and range. Yesterday we learned that domain is the description of all possible inputs and range is the description of all possible outputs. Our lesson yesterday focused on identifying domain and range if you are given a story or a situation. The focus today's lesson will be identifying domain and range when you have a graph of a situation. So I have two examples below for the introduction. The first one, we have this graph here, and we are told the graph shows the amount of rainfall in centimeters a certain number of hours after the storm. And the question we are answering is, what is the domain? Everything we learned yesterday is going to also be helpful for today. When we are asked about the domain, it means we are thinking about all possible inputs. And in this situation, our input is the number of hours. I know that because it's on our x-axis. If I'm describing the domain, I'm going to ask myself all the same questions I did yesterday. So asking myself questions about, should it be only positive numbers, negative numbers? Is it only whole numbers, or are fractions and decimals okay? And is there a minimum and a maximum in the situation? So here we're talking about number of hours. That can be any sort of number, right? You don't just have to have whole numbers. But because we have a graph, it makes it a lot easier to see if there is a minimum and a maximum. For example, here on this graph, I see our line starts at 2, which is a little different because I'm used to lines starting at 0. And it goes from 2 all the way up to this number here. Now it looks like every other line is counting by 10, so 52, 62. So that means these lines in the middle are 5. And so this line must stop at 5 more than 62, which would be 67. So we've got our graph goes between 2 and 67. So when I go to describe the domain, we said hours can be any sort of number. So I would say all numbers between 2 and 67. I could talk about 2 hours, 12 hours. I could talk about 30 hours. I could talk about 40.5 hours. That's why I'm saying all numbers. We could get questions about the domain of a graph or also the range of the graph. So similar questions I'd be asking myself here. Don't forget, range is related to the output. Go ahead, read through this problem, pause the video, and try to describe the range, and then come back to the video to see how you did. So for the second problem, we were told that the graph shows the population of hippos at the Indianapolis Zoo over the years. Looking at our graph here, we've got our years on our x-axis and then the number of hippos on our y-axis. The question is, what is the range, which means we said we're thinking about what the output could be. The output in this situation is the number of hippos. I know that because my output will always be on my y-axis. So thinking about numbers you could use to describe number of hippos, this will be a little different. It's not going to be all numbers because I can't have 20.5 hippos. You would want to only use whole numbers. Remember, whole numbers are those counting numbers, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. We can only use those numbers to describe a number of hippos. Looking at the graph, though, there's a little more I need to say. If I just say whole numbers, that means based on this graph, it's any whole number. But looking at the graph, there is no year that there's only like 2 hippos. Similar to above, our graph, the number of hippos is starting at 12. And so 12 is our minimum. There is never a number smaller than 12. And our maximum on this graph is this point right here, which if I go over, it's that line between 32 and 36. That would be 34. So I don't want to just say whole numbers. I need to include that minimum and maximum as well. We could say whole numbers and then 12 to 34, something like that. That means looking at the graph, I can find points that represent the number of hippos, where the hippos are between 12 hippos, 13, 14, 15 hippos, all the way up to 34 hippos. In today's lesson, we're going to be looking at more graphs like these and identifying the domain and range using the graphs. Thanks so much for watching. I hope you found this helpful.